today we're going to get into the 1965 playoffs. And before I get there, I just had breakfast. It was good. But before getting in here, I looked in the mirror and I saw peanut butter like all over my face. So hopefully that's gone. Uh, if not, I don't know. It was good. But anyways, the Toronto Maple Leafs in the 1964-65 season made it into the final playoff spot. So, hey, as said before in other videos, it's one against three, two against four when the playoffs started. So they would end up playing the second place Montreal Canadiens. So a rematch from last year in the semifinals, and this would actually be the third year in a row these two teams would face off in the semifinals. To put it bluntly, this is where rivalries start right there. When you play in the playoffs like that in important games, that's where rivalries really start, right there. And guess what? The Leafs had beat them the two times previous to this. So Montreal was definitely looking to exact some revenge in the 1965 playoffs. So once again, this is going to be a tough matchup for the Leafs. Just looking down at the roster, though, I like what I see from the Leafs team. You got a really good rookie in Ron Ellis, tied with Mahovlich, leading the team in goals. And you may have strengthened your goaltending, you did, by getting Terry Sawchuk to play along Johnny Bauer. Certainly both older goalies, but so does Montreal, and we'll get to that in a sec. But I like what I see from this Toronto team, so I would be confident at the time that okay, this is going to be tough, but I like what I see out of Toronto here too. So in Montreal, they do have two good options as well, great options to go to turn to in the net, as they have 31-year-old Charlie Hodge. Uh, but also Hall of Famer 35-year-old Gump Worsley, who seems to have recovered from his, I believe it was a hamstring injury he suffered in, I think it was October of 1963. He went on to play, I think, around 20 games this season, but he was definitely turned to in the playoffs by the Habs. So there you have it. Now with Montreal, look, taking a little deeper dive into their team. Like the previous season, they had five 20 goal scorers. The Leafs had three, Montreal had five. So you had Claude Provo, as I mentioned earlier, he led the club with 27 goals. Ralph Backstrom had 25. Henri Richard had 23. Claude LaRose had 21 and their captain, Jean Beliveau, he had 20. So the Leafs will have to look out as well for tough guy John Ferguson. Just to mention his son, John Ferguson Jr., was a general manager for the Leafs as well at a time period, but I don't think that went so well. Unfortunately, those were kind of part of the thinner years in Toronto where making the playoffs was a struggle. But anyways, and then there was also rough defenseman Ted Harris to look out for too. Make sure you know where these guys are on the ice as a Leaf out there. So the series started at the Montreal Forum, and the Habs actually took the first two games on home ice by scores of 3-2 and 3-1. So they headed to Toronto and played at Maple Leaf Gardens. And there, the Leafs tied the series back up, winning both their games on home ice as well. They won in overtime 3-2 and winning game four 4-2. So we got some nice tight scores going on here. Hopefully, I am assuming there were some good games to be watched. And game five was back in Montreal, and you're seeing a pattern here. Montreal won again on home ice by a 3-1 score. Now, I was actually able to see Game Six, a copy of it. I certainly wasn't alive when this game was on, but I seen a copy of this game, and when watching Game 6 at Maple Leaf Gardens. I could instantly tell I was in Maple Leaf Gardens, especially when I heard the PA announcer Paul Morris, who held that job from 1961 until 1999. So when I was a kid, I heard this guy's voice every Saturday. Well, almost every Saturday night. They played in Toronto. It seemed like a lot back when I was a kid on Saturdays. Or I think they might have Wednesday night games on TV too. And if it was in the Gardens, you would hear his voice. I can still hear it. He had a great voice. Um, but behind each bench, you had Toe Blake for Montreal and Punch Imlach for the Leafs, each sporting their own fedora. At least I think they're the fedoras. Um, in net for Montreal here in Game 6 was Gump Worsley, and in net for Toronto was Johnny Bower. So an excellent matchup there in the goaltending department. Now, when the game started, the Leafs definitely seemed to have the jump coming out of the gate, and they led the game quite early in the first period, 3-1. They had goals from Dave Keon, Red Kelly, and Ron Ellis. Great trio there to get the goals for you. John Ferguson had the Montreal goal, but Montreal, they came back. They worked their way back on goals from Jacques Laperriere and Bobby Rousseau, tied the game back up at 3, and they were off to overtime at the Gardens. Well, believe it or not, the leading goal scorer for Montreal that year, Claude Provo, got the game winner, and the Leafs were eliminated in the 1965 playoffs in 6 games. Uh, so that's okay because Montreal is a darn good team. But one thing I definitely noticed in the game, and I'm going to share with you now. Um, I talked about in previous videos, like, and these are just opinions. Everybody has their own. But I think from 1964 going forward, the greatest Leaf of all time, I think, was Dave Keon. The greatest goaltender was Johnny Bower. He definitely had, as I said, cups to prove it. Both of them did. And playoff performances, which is huge. You need that. That has to be part of your game if you want to be successful in sport. Um, but with defensemen, I didn't mention who I thought the best defenseman was. And there's two guys. One was Tim Horton, who was playing for this team in Toronto at the time, and the other one was Börje Salming, Swedish defenseman. I will certainly get to more about Börje in the future as well. Um, but one thing I noticed here about Tim Horton that I was like, ooh, that's good. That's not easy to do. Um, was his ability, his strong ability, and bringing the puck out of his own zone. There could be two halves on him, and he would either find the open man with a pass or be able to bring the puck out of the zone on his own by himself. Um, I think both of these defensemen, Horton and Salmon, I think these are the things for me because the game is so different now than it was at this time. I mean, sure, the bottom line is putting the puck in the net, but guys didn't wear helmets then. Goalies didn't wear masks. Um, the game was rougher and tougher, and definitely I seen it in the 70s. It got overwhelmingly violent. Some of the things that happened, bench clearing brawls, it's definitely happened in the 60s here. I remember seeing a brutal incident, a bench clearing brawl with the Leafs in black and white TV. And it was different then. It was like okay for two guys to take on one guy, and like oh, like you might need more than that if you want to take down Eddie Shack or Tim Horton. But that doesn't. Luckily, I'm very happy they got that out of the game. That needed to be taken out of the game before something really horrible happened. But it was definitely a different game. But the guys I have on my list for the best are guys I think I could put in any era of hockey and they would succeed highly. I think if you put Tim Horton or Boreas Salming in today's NHL, um, they would be just as good. Now, I know both of them did get penalty minutes, um, but I think both of them could tone it down, or they could play to the structure of the game or what is necessary for you to perform as a defenseman. Because I think they both had wonderful placement on the ice or to defend in a time where I mean it's always been extremely important to have that, but I think that key element would be able to uh, you'd be able to put that into today's hockey. And as I said, Dave Keon, uh, he played in a time where it was pretty rough and violent. He played through the 70s. He retired in the early 80s. But that wasn't him. He was a highly skilled player um, who could take the punishment, right? So I think if you put him into today's game, I actually think his numbers would just explode. I think he would have even better numbers than he did back then. Certainly playing under Punch Imlach, where it was defense first or defensive hockey is extremely important. Um, I think his numbers would be even better. Um, so I thought I would share that with you. Um, Now another guy, another defenseman, I'll get to him, but he played during the Boreas Salming era as well. He's not, he may not be up into that cream of the crop, but he was a great defenseman. Think I really enjoyed watching him was Ian Turnbull. Him and Salming together in the 70s, it was excellent. You literally had two number one defensemen. And a question I will ask, um, uh, I don't know if they've had a defenseman as good as them since then. Um, they've had some good ones, absolutely, but that good, I don't think. I definitely think Ian Turnbull is underrated. He's a guy because literally nobody talks about this guy, I find. Certainly you have to be of a certain vintage, I guess, to remember him. He was before my time. Um, but nobody talks about him. He was the first Leaf to score 20 goals in a season, and he did it twice. The other one to do that was Ali Afridi. Um, his career was cut short, though. He was only 29, I think, when he finished hockey. That's extremely young. So he wasn't able to have a long career like Boreas Salming or Tim Horton did. And Tim Horton died while he was still playing in the NHL at like 42 or 43. Wow, he still had game at that age. So, anyways, back to the 1965 playoffs. Um, so for the Leafs in the playoffs, Red Kelly and Ron Ellis led the team in goals. They both had three apiece. Um, Kelly also led the team with 5 points in the 6 games. And it was Kent Douglas who led the squad with 19 pins in the 16, six, not 16. If there was 16, they would have advanced. That is for sure. And by the way, you can't play 16 games in 2 rounds. Anyways, it was 6 games. So in that, Bauer played 5, Sawchuk played 1, and it was Bauer who got both of the wins for the Leafs. So the Leafs were out in 6 and had to pack their bags at the Gardens there. But it's okay. I know you're not going to win 4 Stanley Cups in a row. 3 is still amazing and quite an accomplishment. But it was the Habs. this year that had a date with the finals, and it's been a few years since they've been there. Now they're going to face the Chicago Blackhawks, and who played a 7 game series against the Detroit Red Wings again. These teams seem to face off each year at this point. In the 7th game, Chicago took the game at the Olympia in Detroit by a 4-2 score. Stan Mikita had the winner and also added an assist. So in the finals, it was Montreal who had home ice. They were in second. Chicago was in third. Um, and Montreal, exactly like they did against the Leafs, took the first 2 games at home with scores of 3-2 and 2-0. So tight scores again here. And just like the Leafs series, Chicago got them back at Chicago Stadium by showing that they could play good defense as well by beating the Habs of scores of 3-1 and 5-1. Chicago opened it up there in the 4th game. Montreal returns that favor, though, back at the Montreal Forum, as they beat the Hawks 6-0, a spanking there in Game 5. And then Chicago, back at the Chicago Stadium, they went back to playing good defense again and beat the Habs 2-1 on home ice. Now, Game 7, it was cool. I was able to see this game as well. So that was cool to see the Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. That's pretty exciting. Winner take all. Loser, sorry. Better luck next year, maybe. Glenn Hall was in net for Chicago and Gump Worsley for Montreal. And right out of the gate, Montreal played better. They went on and took the lead early, and they were up 4-0 in the first period. At that point, I could tell. I know who's behind the Montreal bench. I know who's on there, on the ice for these guys. I felt that this game was over. Montreal displayed to me some excellent forechecking and penalty killing when Chicago would get the man advantage. Um, Boy, Toll Blake had this Montreal team playing pretty close to perfect hockey here. Really did a good job there. Uh, Now, as a viewer, or just maybe to some viewers, this doesn't always equate to excellent hockey or edge of your seat excitement. Um, but personally, I enjoy watching it, or I enjoy seeing a team that you can tell is very well coached, or following a system that works with elements that I enjoy watching, like forward checking or body checking, um, or closing off the zone. Um, either with a heavy hit at the blue line, um, you know, stuff like that. Trap hockey is horrible. It ruined hockey. We recovered from that, luckily. Um, but trap hockey is extremely boring. Whew, I'm not gonna. ugh, I'm not looking forward to the days of jumping into I think it was the mid '90s when that started, and really ruined the game after it was just flowing so well. Not far before that. But anyways, there you have it. So Montreal ended up winning Game 7 by a 4-0 score. And I feel bad for the Chicago fans. This coming from a Toronto Maple Leaf fan who literally has never seen a Stanley Cup win in his life. Um, I think it's because at this time Toronto was very successful in the playoffs. And Chicago, yes, they won in 1961 with Bobby Hall there, and Glenn Hall, but they would not win another cup until 2010. And they had some very good teams in there through the 60s and the 70s, even through parts of the 80s. They had good teams when Denny Savard was there, um, or in the 90s when Ed Belfour was there and Mike Keenan was the coach. But they just couldn't get over that final hump. But anyways, that might sound strange to some people. Toronto Maple Leaf fans feeling sorry for other fans, but I did. But then on the other side of the coin, this is excellent for Montreal. Good for them. They returned to winning the Stanley Cup, and they got Toll Blake his ninth Stanley Cup, sixth as a coach. And I think in the end, he would win two more cups for Montreal. That's incredible. Wow. This was also the first year of the Conn Smythe Trophy given to the MVP of the playoffs. And this was won by the Habs captain, Jean Beliveau. He really performed well in the playoffs. He had 8 goals, 8 assists for 16 points in the 13 games he played. He also led the league in the playoffs with 5 power play goals and 4 game winners. He even had 34 penalty minutes, which is something because he wasn't a big penalty minute guy either. He was just, you know, highly skilled. He wasn't out there, I don't think, like causing a ruckus on the ice, but he had 34 penalty minutes. Um, Now, Bobby Hull led the playoffs with he had 10 goals and 17 points. Pretty darn good there from Bobby. But Montreal in the finals, they did neutralize him a bit as he had only 2 goals and 4 points in the 7 games he played against them. So he was absolutely lights out against the Detroit Red Wings. Um, and I got to give both Gump Worsley and Charlie Hodge props as well. I mean, yeah, Bedivo was the Conn Smythe winner, but these guys did an excellent job as well. It must have been difficult to maybe give one player the Conn Smythe in this year, but that's the way it is. It's one guy. Gump played 8 games, Charlie played 5, but Gump had some sparkling numbers. He had a 936 save percentage and a 1.68 goals against average with 2 shutouts. Wow. I think the team had a 1.8 goals against average. That is amazing. Gump also looked like a very strong competitor and a dude I would not want to meet in a dark alley. Yes, he was into the game. And this was also Sam Pollock's first year as a general manager of the Montreal Canadiens. He went on to an incredible career with Montreal, and he would have his name on the Stanley Cup 12 times. Incredible. Incredible work there. But that's the end of the 1964-65 season and playoffs. The Montreal Canadiens are the winners, and Leafs made the playoffs, but were eliminated by the Habs. So anyways, we will keep moving on and get into, I believe, the next draft will be my next the third annual NHL draft. So yeah, if you like this video, hey, just hit like. Don't be afraid to subscribe. I've got 5 subscribers so far. I haven't been on here very long, so that's excellent. And if you want to comment on anything, go ahead and do so. Once again, just make sure it's family friendly. That's all that I ask. But anyways, until next time, go Leafs go.